Welcome to a Road Less Traveled podcast, the virtual edition. Today we are joined by Erika, and we are talking about my version of the mother of mobility, Miss Bertha Benz. Welcome back, Erika, for another Woman in History series. We're calling it The Women Who Paved the Road Less Traveled.
I love that.
Oh, I'm punny.
You're so good.
Who are we talking about today?
All right. Today we've got one just especially for you. Rumor has it you did something with cars sometime.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time. So we're going to talk about Bertha Benz.
Version 1. Ooh, Bertha Benz. All right.
Bertha Benz. What do you know about her?
I know that she was the first woman to drive an internal combustion engine. She was a driving force behind, or she was her husband's business partner. So a driving force behind his business.
And his business partner, of course, being her husband, Carl Benz, who is one half of what we know today as Mercedes Benz.
Yes.
Which is interesting because I think a lot of times we forget that the people who started car companies had to, invent the car.
Yeah.
Ford's big thing was not that he invented the car, but that he really made the mechanized.
Yes.
I know this. Yeah. Oh my God. I've done this so many times. He did the mechanized construction line.
He broke the work week, first of all.
Yes. He broke the work week and he did the assembly line, the mechanized assembly line. I knew collectively we'd get there. So he didn't actually invent a car. He did mechanize the assembly line, but not the same. Bertha Benz is really interesting because it's another question of wealth and money, as we're sort of starting to see patterns of how these things affect women who wind up being very successful. Mm-hmm. She came from a wealthy family in a German province, and even before she was married to Carl Benz, mm-hmm. she was giving her dowry to fund one of his failing factories.
So I don't know if you got this far in the research, but were they in love? Is this a love story, or is this an arranged situation?
I think it was a love story. They met at a social club, like a country club kind of thing. Okay. And they seem to really hit it off. Now, I've never seen the word love.
Okay.
But I think their story's pretty clear. Granted, again, when I haven't read primary source material, I always want to couch that a little bit. But mm-hmm. I think it's pretty clear. They had a very strong bond. Okay. And you used the word partnership earlier, mm-hmm. which, ironically, not a single gosh darn article used the word partner.
Interesting.
In all of my research. Yeah. In fact, the Mercedes-Benz website said, I had to write it down. It was so good. She helped as best she could.
That's their current website says that?
Their current Mercedes-Benz.com website. She helped as best she could.
Ouch.
She literally funded the entire project and then was an active partner in helping him create the modern parts of a car.
Talked to a Mercedes-Benz dealer who is another guest, and I know for sure she'll be interested in this little tidbit that I'm going to text her later.
As you should. And it's, none of the other, not Britannica, not Mercedes-Benz, not History Channel, none of, Women in Automotive had a little blurb on her. There was all kinds of random websites that have blurbs on her, and none of them use the word partner. They all talk about helper or mm-hmm. wife. But she played a very active role in the creation of a modern motor car as we understand it. So most people talked about her as being a wife or a helper, not as a partner.
So mind-blowing. Not only is she not a partner, she's a helper, not a wife, and she's the primary funding source. So she's the primary funding source for what we know today as the internal combustion engine.
That is correct. Also, fun fact. So it's interesting because the first, in my research, they had some interesting pictures and and like cars after they made them. They used bicycle chassis.
Mm-hmm.
So the first cars almost look like, like when you go to like New Orleans or Vegas and like someone's riding a bike and you're sitting in the back.
Yeah, yeah.
They almost look like that. Like the front end looks like a bicycle with a steering wheel.
Yes.
And then there's like two people in a little carriage, which cracked me up because I'm used to thinking, because that's the late 1800s. I'm used to thinking cars at like 1910 that look, like a Model A, a Model T.
Yeah.
Very, very different. But which part do I want to talk about first? Okay, so you're totally right with the first long distance car ride. It was about 65 miles across Germany. Mm-hmm. They had to get the gasoline from a local chemist, so like a drugstore. And I believe she went with one or both of her sons.
Okay. That's, as a parent, an interesting decision to make, but that's okay.
I mean, it'd been a while. It had been, I think, 10 years since they had started the project.
Okay.
And so they'd sort of gotten it down pat. But something that was alluded to on several websites, and again, I can't quite get to the meat of it, was part of the reason she was such a great business partner was not just the inventing end, which was very obvious. And her husband has acknowledged it in his own personal papers. But that she was really good at marketing. And one of the reasons that her journey is so well known, this cross-country 65-mile car journey, is because she marketed the heck out of it.
So her husband acknowledges her in his own, in his own writing. And, obviously history is written by white men. So he acknowledges her, and that's how we get the knowledge of how integral she was, because everybody else has decided that she is not integral. That just blows me away.
And what was really interesting is one of the things I read is in 2011, they did some kind of Bertha Benz challenge in Germany. Okay. And it was about sustainable cars. It had nothing to do with her or her contributions or women in automotive or anything. It was just like a competition for sustainability. And I'm like, well, I'm glad she got the title, but how does that honor her legacy, highlight the role she played in the actual invention of the modern car? Because the other thing that she solely invented was the brake pad.
Really? I actually didn't know that. That's freaking incredible.
So she's the one who realized that the braking mechanism wasn't working. And so she created a leather brake pad. I couldn't find any sketches, pictures, anything of what that might have looked like. But she knew that they needed a better, because I assume, right, otherwise it would have been metal on metal.
Yeah. So
you needed the leather on metal to help make the brakes actually function. And I would assume that the other concern would be metal on metal would spark. It would also, and a combustion engine.
Very noisy, very dangerous. It sounds terrible.
Right. And then you don't want sparks to add to that. So she came up with the idea and the name of a brake pad.
And okay, so who does history attribute that invention to? Do you happen to know?
I have no idea.
You know what?
I assume if we Google it,
about her, I'm gonna.
Let's do it. I assume it'll come up, but it's very clear based on the research that it was hers, that she invented it. I think the problem is it's not who invented it, it's who patented it.
So it's attributed to Herbert Ford.
Okay.
What year are you?
So the brake pad would have been in the 1890s.
Okay. Interesting.
What does it say about Herbert Ford?
A patent in 1901.
1897 was the big year for their car, for actually their first trip. And by that, I don't mean going anywhere, but getting it to run was 1897. And it had the brake pads at the time.
I might have to dig more into that. Obviously, this is a high level Google search, not necessarily historically accurate. Let me, put a pin in that. But that's really mind blowing. So,
but again, it's going to go to who patented it.
Yeah, right.
And if Ford was the one who patented it, yeah.
Well, what role does that play in the country in which it was patented? So even like, do patent rules, do you know the answer to this? Do patent rules, I mean, I know now they do, are
yes,
like international, but at the time, like, how do you know if somebody patented it in Germany versus the United States or England?
I don't have a good answer for that. Okay. I know that patent offices were physical offices, and in the U.S. we had them in big cities. I think they were in New York, Washington, Chicago, and San Francisco. And Washington was the home office, because that's where the government was. And you had to describe and provide pictures and everything of what you wanted to patent. And sometimes you would have issues patenting if you were not related to the industry. So let's say you wanted to invent a, I don't know, new type of shoe, but you're not a cobbler. Oh. They sometimes would reject your patent. So in order to get these patents for electricity, for light bulbs, for the car, I think you had to kind of be in the car industry.
Interesting.
And I know women did get patents, but that's the US. Okay. Interestingly, like if we go back even further, the 1860s, the cotton gin was invented here in the US, and that wound up going around the world. And it was patented in America. So we knew that, but I don't know how that legally that patent would have worked when that machine was exported.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bertha Benz is over here, funding the invention of the internal combustion engine.
She outlived her husband. I'm seeing also a pattern. Most of these women are outliving their husbands.
I mean, I think that is an actual statistic that women outlive men by an average of 3 to 5 years, or outlive their husbands, if you will.
Yes. Oh, the other thing she invented, according to, I cross-referenced this, Mercedes-Benz.com and Britannica, obviously not using super exciting sources here, both talked about the fact that she invented gears to go uphill.
Okay. So the shift.
Yeah, she invented shifting gears.
So she's pretty freaking incredible. And
she is.
And she gets she helped as best she could.
She helped as best she can. And I think, and this is why I think when you ask, like, was this kind of a love match? I think it had to have been, because the way all of these websites, even describing her as a helper or as best she can, talk about their relationship, like they worked together on a daily basis. They, there's a lot of phrasing like that makes me think that they probably had a very strong partnership. Because it looks like it was very much a meeting of the minds. She was very intellectually focused. You and I have talked before, a couple podcasts ago, where we talked about, like, women who were maybe ahead of their time or who were interested in the sciences and the academia, finding ways to do that. And it feels like she really found a safe haven to focus on, engineering and mechanics. And it was with her husband.
Well, and I mean, unfortunately, even though she's like a marketing genius, not able to market her own successes in her own name. I mean, that's frustrating to even think about.
And there's no conversation of that. There's no conversation of how she felt, what she brought to the table. It's all in relation to her husband and to the car. There's no, it's interesting because, like when we discussed Madam C.J. Walker before, I think Madam C.J. Walker, when we talk about her story and we read about her, she's the main character, and we see her, she believed in X, so she supported X.
Yeah.
She wanted Y, so she did that. We aren't hearing any of that about Bertha Benz. As we've been discussing, I think we're not hearing how Bertha felt about these things. I think to get a really good conversation on that, someone would have to dive into primary sources, either from her or maybe from local newspapers. I'm not even sure if there's any substantive books on her.
So I was going to say, does that mean somebody has to go to like Germany? Sorry, we're adjusting.
That's what that means. And in fact, that's why in academia, at least in history, we're required to have a second language.
Oh, like you're to be like somewhat fluent. I actually didn't know that either.
Yeah. So in academia, you have to have multiple languages. The idea being it is likely, no matter what you're studying, you're going to wind up in an archive where you've got to read something in another language. So I've brushed up on my French. I can read it. I cannot speak it. I'm atrocious. But in the off chance I need to read something about Jefferson and French food, I can at least identify all the foods.
I mean, I have lots of questions about why that would even be a requirement, especially with technology today and access to information.
Well, one, that technology is, but it's so new, right? So it literally 20 years ago, even if you wanted to read Jefferson's papers, you had to physically go to wherever those papers were.
Right.
Now they're largely digitized, particularly, again, the big name white men are digitized.
Yeah.
But if you want to read something on Bertha Benz, there's likely a something somewhere in Germany that just has her collection of papers, and you'd have to go and read through them.
That actually sounds like a really good trip. Do you happen to know, was she ever published? Was she ever?
Never saw anything about
streamed?
Nope. Never saw anything about that. But, you wind up with archival materials of like personal papers, and it's everything from letters to diaries to receipts to, one of the things when I have studied the White House is Jackie O, so jumping way ahead in time, in the 60s, would personally check over every menu. So part of the archival material from Jackie O's tenure, she wasn't Jackie O at the time, but Jackie Kennedy's tenure as First Lady is these menus that she has written in hand, correcting spelling, changing, because a lot of items were in French because she was serving French food. So she was checking the French spelling, checking if the items were right, or saying like, hey, I thought we discussed changing this. So we actually see that similar things with wealthier women in Europe and England who would make notes on menus, on household expenses, those kinds of things. And those can be just as interesting and give just as much information about what the women's priorities were as a letter can. Because we can see how much detail they put into their sort of feedback and notes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, so some of that's available, but not a ton.
Yeah. And I don't even know if or where Bertha Benz, if there are papers, where they might be. And sometimes you never know. You find them in random places. They'll show up at a county records office, or somebody will buy an old home and find papers and give them to somebody. And records can wind up anywhere. Thomas Jefferson's records, again, to be a broken record, the majority of his papers are in Boston because his grandchildren, when he died in 1826, when his grandchildren donated the papers in the 1850s, the Massachusetts Historical Society was the oldest historical society in the country. It had been founded in the 1700s. Mm-hmm. And they felt it was the only safe place to put his papers. Oh. They didn't even give them to the university that he founded, because they were worried the university would go under and the papers would be lost.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So Virginia papers in Massachusetts, Jefferson's butler's papers are in Pasadena at the Huntington Library.
Don't we have like national archives for this?
Well, they're private papers. They can be given to the National Archive, but somebody sold them and the Huntington Library purchased them. And that's how Jefferson's butler is in California.
Okay. Well, that's one way to approach.
Well, but here's the thing. Jefferson is one of the best known historical figures in the US, and he was a prolific writer. He wrote hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. So there's a lot of material to work with. Bertha Benz was important because she helped make the car, but nobody thought she was. We don't know what we're working with. We don't know if her grandkids even thought it was important to give her papers to someone. So it's really hard for women in particular for us to find the material on them.
I think that's going to be a very interesting dive for me now is where and why are these things getting lost? And I mean,
Yeah.
I think we have some perspective on it. But what's happening? What's happening to it? Like, is it largely thrown away? Like, I have questions.
A lot of it's thrown
A lot
away.
of questions.
A lot of it's thrown away. A lot of it's kept. One of my friends is working on her Master of Library and Information Science, which is the master's degree if you want to go into like archives.
Okay.
And so she spends a lot of time talking about archival material. And, you know, she was volunteering, or maybe she did turn into a job anyway. And she had to go archive these paintings that were painted that were just like in a shed in this museum. And so she had to go back into this shed, and they were paint like with, so here we can use cypress trees as the backing because they are very water resistant.
Mm-hmm.
So she had all these paintings where the backings of the frames were these cypress trees, and nobody knew what was back there. And they were already in a museum. Yeah.
So I think this like takes us back to the question of why should people care? And should they care just because, you know, hey, this is what really happened and you should care because of this? Should you care because it's, you know, representation in history? From your perspective, why should people care about preserving, you know, the reality of history?
Another loaded question. Thank you so much. If I could pivot just a little bit, let's use Bertha Benz as a specific. We in the modern day as women are still like, we're not as shuttered as she was, right? Like we can go out and publish something. We can go out and invent something. It's easier to get a patent. But we are facing a lot of the same struggles in male dominated industries. And one of the reasons we face those is we've been told that that's not what women do. Mm-hmm. But the reality is we have been doing it. Women have been, again, flouting convention and pushing against social norms the whole time. It's like the existence of women in history. Mm-hmm. And we don't think about that, or not that even that we don't think about that. We're not teaching our children that women have also been doing these things. Mm-hmm. So I think it gets into the reality of history, how society is structured, how patriarchal society is, mm-hmm. and a lot of other layers. But here's a really good example. And I read this online. I don't even know if it's true, but I think it's a really good example that helps us think about it. So in archaeology class, someone held up a calendar. The calendar had 28 days on it. Mm-hmm. And like tick markings. This is a prehistoric calendar. And male archaeologists said, oh, this is the first recorded calendar. This is men marking time.
That's the first
and a female
menstrual cycle.
That a female archaeologist came in and said, I defy you. I believe this is the first, menstrual cycle. This is someone tracking their cycle. It is in 28-day increments.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing to talk about. How did we get the calendar? What did we make?
Well,
how did we make the months the way that they are?
Don't you love when I have random fun facts?
Yes.
The current calendar, called the Gregorian calendar, was actually changed. So in Thomas Jefferson's life, it was changed.
Okay.
The Pope changed it.
Why?
I don't know why, but they added or subtracted. I think they added in leap year or something.
Oh, okay.
And so the day Jefferson was born and his birthday don't actually line up on the same day.
It's kind of like Jesus.
Kind of. Well, that one's a big one.
Just kidding. Not opening that can of worms.
Right. But so the calendars have been changed again by men in power to do whatever. But they figured out right early on that seasons change, days get longer and shorter. And that's what calendars were really important for until we started, till we became agrarian and were selling, we became a trade society. And then that kind of stuff was more important. And that's more along the lines of what I teach in my community college class, where I teach
Okay.
world history instead of US.
I
But yeah, a woman's perspective changes how we understand history. If you look at a calendar and see a passing of days versus looking at a calendar and seeing a menstrual cycle, very
mhm.
different. And their purpose and their function and what they mean are very different. And so when we're not having
Kind
these
of.
conversations about, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when we're not having these conversations about what women actually did,
Mhm.
right? Mary Shelley is the mother of modern science fiction novels with
Uh-huh.
Frankenstein. Bertha Benz helped invent the combustion engine and parts of the modern car we still use today,
She's
right?
literally the mother of mobility.
Yes.
I feel like I'm going to get some
And
comments on that. And so I would be very interested if anybody has any other historical facts in to see, what that is. But
right.
based on the parts of the car that we're talking about, it sounds like she is the mother of mobility.
Yep.
So
Shifting gears and brake pads. We could not have cars without them.
not
And
the way
those
that we use them now.
no. And those multiple articles, and again, Google articles,
Mm-hmm.
things you can quickly search, have said that she was responsible for those. But no one knows it, and Ford patented it.
So women are often the primary drivers in a household. And
I see what you did there.
let me define what that kind of means. Not that they are the only driver, but they drive the majority of the time, because
Mhm.
women do about 4 hours more labor in a day, roughly, than a man
Yep.
unpaid. That's according to data,
Mhm.
which includes women are far more likely to care for an elderly family member. They're far more likely to be taking children, picking them up. They're far more likely to be going to the grocery store, and getting food for the household. I am not saying that they are the only person that does this. I know many
Yes.
households, including my own, where my husband does a good amount of these things also. But it's very interesting to look at it from a perspective of a woman at the time, where cities are literally built around the function of a man being the only one working, the only one leaving the home, where she is contributing so much to mobility. And when you mentioned that she took her kids with her, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not really a thing that was happening at the time.
Nope.
I'm interested. I'm more interested in her. I want to learn more about Bertha Benz.
And I encourage you to do that. But we've covered a lot of what you're going to get on your Google searches. I didn't do any super serious deep dive. I would be interested to see if maybe there are some published books where she's mentioned in more detail. But it's the other thing that's really interesting is I always learned in my history classes, the only invention that really helped lessen the burden, the work burden for women, was the washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
Because it used to be you literally had to take your laundry to a water source or bring a water source in, and laundry is heavy and wet clothes are heavy and all this stuff. So the washing machine, which came really in the modern aspect, came around in the 50s. Earlier versions existed before that were more mechanized, but as we know it, the 50s. The rest really didn't help with the burden of housework. But it makes me question, well, wait, Bertha Benz had a huge effect on the creation of a car.
Mm-hmm.
And starting in the 50s, when we really established the modern housewife,
Mm-hmm.
when housewives would often have cars because they were doing grocery shopping, they were doing these other things, and how the car actually did a lot to lessen the burden, as well, in a different way than a laundry machine does or a washing machine does.
I think that's a really interesting point. And we're going to definitely dive more into that at some point. And
Yep.
how, around when did households start to regularly see a second car? I think that's almost commonplace at this point. And if, we're at a pivotal point in history where mobility is shifting, the way that we approach getting from one place to another has largely been in the United States specifically has been an internal combustion engine. We're very, very attached to our vehicles. We're very, we like to have that freedom. And there are large cities where other types of transportation are available and utilized very well. But for the majority of the United States, getting from one point to another is you go by car. It's not as common to go by train. It's the way that you do it. And as we make the shift from ICE or internal combustion engine to electric or plug-in hybrid or whatever it is, I would like to delve more into more recent contributions of women to these areas, because I can assure you that I can assure you that they exist, and not only that they're contributing to the reasonable solutions as opposed to the very extreme solutions.
Extreme. Yeah. Well, again, when we're talking about women's contributions to the modern world as we know it, more and more online, I'm seeing little, thumbnails, which is like Hedy Lamarr, the Hollywood star. Mm-hmm. And Hedy Lamarr, if you don't know, invented the basis of Wi-Fi.
Okay.
She invented the code. I don't know if it was the mechanism, but the reason we have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is because of the work she did she was a Hollywood starlet making movies.
Oh, wow.
And produced this actual science to help us create Wi-Fi and to get computers off the ground, because we were starting to see computing in the 50s. The computers took up a whole room. Yeah. Very different, obviously, than what we have. But the code work she did for that actually made it possible. And we've seen lots of things like with the movie Hidden Figures where there were these pivotal Black women mm-hmm. at NASA doing the calculations to get the shuttle back up and back. So women are here. We're in the story, but we're not telling the story. Like, we're not telling the story because it's men who did it, because it's men who were in, anytime they show the room, right, from the Apollo 13 launch, mm-hmm. it's a room full of white men. And that was 20 years, 15 years after, after the first launch. So
I encourage women to get in front of the camera, first of all.
Amen.
Get in front of the camera and tell your story instead of offering to take the picture, first and foremost. And second, thank you for bringing some of the things that Bertha did to my attention, because I have some more research to do on her. She's the mom of mobility. I'm gonna coin that one and go check out more of her contributions and try to bring some more awareness around this.
I love it, and I think she is, as far as white women go, right, the perfect candidate to have these discussions about, how she was pivotal to something that is such a part of our modern life that nobody knows about her. I didn't know about her.
I love it. I'm glad that we know about her now. And I'm glad that we're sharing her story, and that, now with the way access to information is with the internet, with social media, all these fun things, once it's kind of out there, it's out there forever. It's not the same as it once was, where everybody can burn the books. I mean, I'm sure there's a way, but hopefully it lives in infamy and somebody discovers her down the road and can truffle out some more information on her.
Absolutely. Hashtag Mama Mobility.
Yes.
I love it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
I'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. A huge thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their stories, wisdom, and breaking down barriers with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support means the world to me and helps spread the word about the amazing women paving the road less traveled in male-dominated industries. If you have suggestions for a future guest or topic you'd like me to explore, please reach out on social media. I'd love to hear from you. Follow me on your favorite social platform for updates and behind the scenes. Keep pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and lifting each other up.